to ourselves. We hold in our hearts one we have not seen in the flesh. We are included in these words, but only if we follow up our faith with good works. The true believer practices what he believes. But of those who pay only lip service to faith, St. Paul has this to say: they profess to know God, but they deny him in their works. Therefore, St. James says, faith without works is dead. Through the prayers of the Holy Hierarch Gregory, O Christ our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. This teaching of St. Gregory the Dialogist was recorded on Ancient Faith Radio, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that believing you may have life in his name.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich, a live listener call-in show where we share the stories of everyday Orthodox people as we get to know the members of the body of Christ. Join the conversation. We invite you to call in with questions at 1-855-AF-RADIO.
Faith Radio. It's April 18th, 2021, and this is Everyday Orthodox. Every Sunday night, we get together to build community through conversation. We Orthodox people, we worship in different jurisdictions and sometimes even in different languages. And we have some different traditions and different ideas. But we're all Orthodox, and it's so beautiful to get to know one another and to see how much we have in common. It is just wonderful. So tonight we have a wonderful guest for you, and we are live, so you can call in to talk to her if you would like. The number is 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. And if you call in, Matushka Trudy will be right there answering your calls. She's producing tonight, and we look forward to hearing from you and getting to know you as well. But here we come to connect the members of the body of Christ all across the miles. And so tonight we are already across the miles because I'm in Texas and our guest is in California, and who knows where you are if you call in. But tonight we have a very special guest, and her name is Mika Radakovich, and I have known her for many years because there was a time when I was a young married woman who just had a sweet little baby and started attending a new church, a new parish, and we came into Holy Trinity Serbian Orthodox Church, just a young little couple, not knowing anyone. And the Radakovich family just embraced us, and they were so wonderful. And Ron and Mickey were just absolutely the sweetest, most welcoming people, and they made us feel at home. And I'll tell you what, I guarantee you there have been a whole bunch of people who have joined that parish because of Ron and Mickey, because they're so good at reaching out and making people feel welcome. So that has been a beautiful experience for us, and I'm delighted for you to get the opportunity to get to know Mickey. So here we are, without any further ado. Mickey, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Lisa, with that extraordinary introduction. And I recall that time. I do recall that time. We loved having you in church, to see you and your young, growing family. You just had one baby at the time. So
that's right.
And we missed you so much when you left, when you moved to Texas.
We missed you guys as well. What a sweet parish that is. And for our listeners, it's in Moraga, California, and it's called Holy Trinity Serbian Orthodox Church. If you're in the area, that is an excellent parish. It's such a nice place, and the people are so sweet and kind. But so, Mickey, you were not born in Moraga, California, right? Where were you born? Where does your story start?
My story starts in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I spent the first 25 years of my life in Milwaukee in the St. Sava Church, Serbian Orthodox Church in Milwaukee. and that's where my grounding was. I think probably one of the most important parts of my early growing up time was spent at the St. Sava Monastery, Serbian Orthodox Monastery in Libertyville, Illinois, which is rather a suburb, I would say more of a suburban area outside of Chicago. So that was not very far from my home, and I spent many summers at the camp there, and that's where I got a really sound grounding, not only in my own church in Milwaukee, but also at the camp.
Oh, wow. Well, at your church in Milwaukee, I didn't realize you were from St. Sava's in Milwaukee. I've actually been there. I got to go speak there a couple of, maybe 2, 3, I don't even know time with COVID. It's so confusing.
Yes.
I think I was there about 3 years ago. And what a great parish. Just what lovely, kind people. When you were growing up, were you involved in like youth group stuff there? Did you guys dance? And what was it like growing up in that parish?
Yes. Well, first of all, you attended the very large cathedral, which is practically, that's on the, people come to the city when they come to visit the city. That's a spot that they will come to visit because of the extraordinary icons.
Yes.
And how beautiful the church is. However, when I was growing up, we just had a tiny little church in another part of the city. In fact, it was probably some sort of a Protestant church that was converted to be Orthodox, of course. And so that's where I grew up. It was a very, very tiny little building, and we were a very small community at that time. The church community now is quite large, as you probably were able to see and when you visited. So I grew up there, and yes, I was part of the young people's choir. I eventually grew up into the adult choir, and we had our dance club, our Colo Club, which was a very important part of growing up. And we had Saturday school. I went to Saturday school, which taught basically the Serbian language. And then on Sunday we had church school. So that was the format I grew up in. And it was lots of fun.
Oh, I bet. So when you were growing up in the parish then, did your parents speak Serbian at home, or were there, at what point, how far back does your family go when people came over from Serbia?
I'm the firstborn American in America.
Oh, okay.
My parents were my mother grew up and was born in an area called Slavonia, which is now a part of Croatia. And my father came from Bosnia. And so they were first immigrants to this country. So we had a dual language in the home. And my grandparents came also. They lived with us. My grandmother really never became a citizen because she was quite old when she came, and it was very difficult for her to learn to write or to read in English. So she essentially was always never became an American citizen, where the rest of the family did. All my uncles and my aunts and, of course, my parents and my grandfather. So anyway, we had the dual language in the home. And Grandma, of course, didn't speak. She spoke very little English. She understood everything, but spoke very little English. So
sure.
that was, yeah.
So you were really using Serbian in the home. And then when you went to Serbian classes, did that sort of help you organize it into like written Serbian and proper?
It did, except the Serbian language is, there's a Latin form and then there's the Cyrillic form. So I can read the Cyrillic alphabet, but my knowledge is very limited because I only had a few years of that schooling, and also my vocabulary is very limited. So that really puts me at where I can't
think
pick
that's
up
common.
a textbook. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think it's common among Americans, right? Who, like, your parents speak Serbian, you learn it, but it's like a limited number. And I have friends who will say they go back to Serbia and they try to speak and they realize they have a child's vocabulary. Like they're saying, in fact, my mom had the same thing too. My mom grew up from Denmark, and she said she went back as an adult and was saying things like, "Where's the potty?" And everyone's looking at her like she's crazy. But that's how it is, right? Your parents are using little kid words with you. Oh my goodness.
Right,
okay.
Right.
So you must have developed a big crowd of friends in the church when you're going Saturday and Sunday plus Colo. I mean, that's a lot. Did you feel like your life kind of centered on the church there?
It did. It pretty much centered on the church, and I always felt like we kind of lived in two worlds. That was well, for me it was the Serbian world because we had so much related to the culture, and then the outside world. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. I was very happy, and I think we had friends in both realms, if I can put it that way.
Oh, absolutely.
That was okay. That was okay.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing too, I think, in common to the immigrant experience, right? That you have this church circle, this Serbian circle, and they speak Serbian and they eat a certain food and they behave a certain way. And then you develop all these American friends who are, not that your Serb family is an American too, but like they have a different culture and they speak differently. What was that like for you in school? And like, did you have a lot of friends who were non-Serbian, and how was that?
Yes, I did. A lot of friends. And I was just as much involved in the school activities that were not Serbian as I was in the Serbian activities. And it was like a dual process. And it didn't, there was not a conflict. It was very easy and it was fun.
Well, it's lovely how kids can just kind of absorb that and not think about it too much, right? Like that it doesn't,
That's right.
It doesn't seem strange at all to speak one language here and another language there and for everyone to be different. But it really is lovely, I think, to have both of those things. So when you were in school, what sort of things interested you? What kinds of activities and subjects, and what kind of a kid were you?
Well, my mother said I was a holy terror. And so because I guess I challenged everything she told me to do or not to do, and so that was a part of me also. But I enjoyed almost everything, any kind of a new experience. I really did. I loved our cultural things that we participated in, from church, and of course I got such a good grounding in our faith. And I would attribute that not only to my church, but as I said before, my experience at camp was absolutely marvelous.
Yeah, tell us about Libertyville. Well, I know that the camp at Libertyville is still going, and it's a well-known. It's kind of the Midwest camp for the Serbian diocese. Tell me about it a little bit. What was it like?
Well, first of all, I think we have to know that I'm an octogenarian, so I am going to go back. I'm going to take you back to camp in the time after World War II. It would be the late 40s and early 50s. And the facilities were very basic. We had a large building. And also, at that time, the camp was conducted girls only and boys only. We didn't have I think today, from what I read, camps today are, the boys and girls are together. Is that correct?
Yeah, they are. They're not in the same dorms. They're kept separate, but they come at the same time. They go in and worship in church at the same time, stuff like that. Oh. Yeah, I didn't realize that they used to do 1 week for girls and a different week for boys.
Well, I'll tell you, we went 3 weeks at a time.
Whoa!
Our camp,
really?
Yes, 3 weeks of camp, and it was just the girls. And it was in a very large building. I believe that building is still there. And we all slept in one dormitory, huge dormitory style, and in cots. And there was a format that it was absolutely wonderful.
It was.
Yeah, regimentation of. I can remember getting up for the morning services started at 7:30, I believe, as I recall. And we would march to the entrance to the church carrying an American flag and the Serbian flag. And the entrance to the St. Sava Monastery in Libertyville was about a half a block long, and there were huge the Italian cypresses along the pathway. It was so wonderful to start your morning going to church between those beautiful cypresses. And then we would do calisthenics in front of the church for a few minutes, and then we would have services, and then come back and go to the to have breakfast. And then there was a regular routine, whether we had classes or, and they were different kinds of classes, whether we were having religion or art or something of that nature. So there was a regular format, which I'm sure all camps operate the same way. But at Libertyville has a beautiful setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's out in the country, and there's a kind of a river that runs through the campgrounds, and the cemetery. There's a very large cemetery there, which is always interesting to kind of walk through there and read the markers, and it's kind of like getting a little history lesson.
Yes.
And that was always, yeah.
Yeah, it is neat, isn't it? And you walk along and you see the last names and you think, I wonder if he's related to my friend Vesna over there.
That's right. I want to mention one other very important thing. Saint Nikolai, who is one of the important saints, as we know, modern saint, was at that time a bishop, and he was staying at Libertyville at the time. He was so very, very special, because after we would have, usually after the Vesper services in the evening, he would leave the church and we would go after him, and he would run in between all those cypresses, and we would chase him. And then he would just, at some point in time, he would stop, and he had these little pieces of candy that he would give each one of us, so we would kiss his hand and he'd give us a blessing. Well, at the time, I did not know what a huge person this was in our faith. I mean, as I got older, I read some of his things, his writings, and I was absolutely amazed, thinking I had contact with this incredible human being.
Isn't that beautiful? And you were blessed by him again and again and again.
And again and again and again. How extraordinary.
And for our audience, that's Saint Nikolai Velimirovich, right? How do you pronounce his name? I always feel like I say the last name wrong. What's the right way to say it? Velimirovich.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, his prayers by the lake, and I mean he's a giant of the faith. It's really, and not just in the Serbian church.
A giant of the faith. I do recall something that I was, of course, very young, 9, 10 years old. And I would look at his face, and he had the most extraordinary eyes. They were so big, round, and soft. And I always was taken by that. The face was so blessed, so blessed.
Isn't that lovely? I mean, it's funny because maybe as children we don't think about it, but there is a certain face to a person who is a saint, to someone who kind of exudes holiness, right? Like not holiness like distance, but really like love and peace, right? Like that gentle, peaceful love. Did he interact with you guys outside of the candy part? Was he in church every time? Did he come to meals stuff?
Yes, he was in church every time. No, he did not join us for meals. He was in church for all services, and he didn't do this every time, but occasionally. And he was there. He was present for services. I don't recall that he joined us for meals, but he was not the bishop of the diocese. He was there visiting from Europe at the time. He was not our bishop of the Midwest diocese.
Oh, so you were especially lucky that he just happened.
Yeah, he just happened to be there, to be staying there with the bishop at the time.
Oh, that's neat.
But I would like to share a funny little story about when the bishop did come. Bishop Dionysius was the bishop at the time. He was, I thought, as a little girl, very stern, and I was a little bit frightened of him. But and if he would join us for any meal, after the meal was over, he would walk around our table. We sat at one big, very long table because we usually had only maybe, 40 camping girls at the most, maybe 50. And he would walk around the table, and you must not leave any food on your plate. So if I knew he was coming, I would run in the kitchen and say to one of the chief cooks happened to be one of my aunts, and I'd say, please don't, for example, if it was breakfast, just give me one egg. Just give me one egg, please, because I didn't want, I wanted to be sure Bishop Denise is there. I cleaned my plate. I did not want to. Oh.
Well, and I can picture, because at these camps, in the Serbian camps especially, I see instead of like hiring, some camp service that's cooking, it's like you said, your aunt, right? It's your aunts and it's the ladies at church and it's your kuma and everybody.
Baba Sophie and Baba Anna and, whoever else. We knew all the cooks. They were from our parishes.
Isn't that lovely? It's so neat. And it's still like that. It's still like that. I go to Camp St. Sava and it's all the moms cooking and, we get to hang out after the meals and it's fun. But it's so neat because I just can picture them, like wanting to give you 3 eggs because even though you can't eat that much, they're worried that you're going to be hungry today.
Well, there was one other thing we did that was highlight. I loved doing this. Whatever food was left over at the end of the day, the bishop had a farm, and it was across the street, and this was a highway. But of course, in those days, this was maybe 1949 or 1950, 51, the roads were not busy. So at the very end of the last meal, probably dinner time, all the extra food would be put into a great big pot. And it was like a wash, not of the wash basin, maybe a pail of some sort. And 2 girls were chosen. You could volunteer. And we would take that over to the pigs. And we would feed the pigs on the farm.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that to me was always a highlight. I was forever volunteering to do that.
Well, it's wonderful too, though. I mean, it is so close to the land and appropriate and sacred and beautiful, right? You don't throw away God's gifts. You go and you feed his animals.
No.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really neat. How many years do you think you went to camp?
I would say probably about 5.
That's great.
I think I was very young. I was maybe 8 or 9. And I would usually, 3 weeks. We always had it for 3 weeks. It was because I remember writing letters to home. My goodness, and my home was less than 100 miles away. But, in those days, travel was not all that easy. And highways were not that good or convenient. So it was you were away from home. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, really, even if you're down the street, when you're at camp and your parents can't come and go, you don't see them. You're away from home. You're sleeping in a weird bed. But so did you make, I imagine, especially 3 weeks, because, my kids go to St. Sava in California, and it is 1 week. And they have made such wonderful friends at camp, and they see them every year, and it's so beautiful. I would imagine being there for 3 weeks. For 5 years, did you make a lot? Like, was it always the same girls and you kind of grow closer?
It was usually the same group, and we managed to stay in touch. But of course, over this period of time, you lose contact. That was how many years ago was that? 70 years ago, 65 years ago. And of course, some of them have passed on already. But we maintain those contacts for many years, and we would see them, or we would see each other, I should say, at various activities. For example, basketball tournaments, choir festivals. There was always a choir festival held in some city, Detroit or Cleveland or Milwaukee or Chicago. So we would see one another at these affairs on a pretty regular basis after we outgrew camp time.
Oh, that's neat. That's really, and it's so nice to be connected because you are growing up in different cities around the Midwest, and this way you get to know each other in that way. That's beautiful. And you mentioned the basketball tournament. I forgot about that in the Midwest. I don't know if they still do that in the Chicago area, but there's a Serbian basketball tournament there too, because there are so many Serbs there. And Milwaukee, I guess now, maybe Milwaukee's bigger then, because you mentioned your parish was smaller. There wasn't a huge Serbian community there, huh?
Well, it's grown. There is a huge Serbian community in Milwaukee now, huge.
Yeah. But
So
back
that,
then it was
yeah.
smaller.
It was
Huh.
it was smaller. It was smaller.
Okay.
It was still fairly good size, but it was smaller than it is to people in contact with one another. It's quite nice.
It's lovely. It really is nice. And it's a funny thing because I know sometimes we come into a parish and we think, like, why are they spending money on sending the kids to basketball or something like these things that don't sound religious? But there is a real value to that community and to everyone being connected. And I think in some ways it does hold you in the church in a different sort of a way. But what do you feel about, you mentioned that the camp experience you think really gave you a spiritual foundation. What
Yes.
was it about camp that was different? Because I think about this a lot. I love camp. And I think about the kids are away from their families, so it's not mom and dad dragging them to church. What was that camp experience for you like spiritually? How did it help you grow?
A number one church. Number one church. Number two was just being with other girls, because there were no boys there. Being with the girls who also had those same feelings and attitudes. So there was a community of believers, and I loved that. I just loved that. And we everything we did revolved around being together, and I think that's a big part of it. That's so much a part of our faith, of Orthodoxy, I think.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah,
well, we think about Holy
I love
Communion, right? It's community. It's everyone coming together. It's beautiful.
Exactly, everyone coming together, and that's what I really liked about it. And so I loved camp, and also I sort of like the regimentation of things. I think I'm that kind of a person.
Yeah.
When somebody says, "Oh, how do you do that for 3 weeks?" I loved it. My husband tells me I would have been good in the military.
I bet. So as a kid growing up in this, did you sort of imagine that you would just always stay in Milwaukee or maybe in the greater Chicago area, and that you would marry a Serb and you would stay there and you would stay in this community? Or did you picture yourself going somewhere else after school?
I pictured myself going somewhere else. I didn't know where that would be or what that would be, but I wanted to explore other areas. I did want to. So after my university training, I went to New York City.
Oh, wow. So what did you study in university? Did you study in Milwaukee?
Yes, I did. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, and I got a bachelor's degree and a teaching credential. So I taught school in New York City for, I think, 2 or 3 years back in the early 60s.
Oh, wow.
And,
that's neat. So what was that like? What was the class like, and what was the neighborhood like?
Well,
Where exactly were you?
Oh, where I taught? I taught in Lower Manhattan in the Bowery, and I had a 4th grade class of 32 kids, and only 2 were English speakers.
Oh, wow.
So that was very, very challenging.
Holy smokes. So did you speak a foreign, you spoke Serbian. Had you learned another foreign language?
No, there was no, because we had Chinese and we had Italian, we had Puerto Ricans.
Wow.
So they just had to get their grounding in English, and it was a challenge. But anyway.
Well, on the other hand, you were a teacher who encountered them at such a critical point in their life. And I'm sure the teaching that you did was really useful to them because you helped them figure out English, helped them find their way.
Well, I hoped I did, but it was difficult because there were so many.
Right.
I did that. You didn't have just one group with one language. There were various languages.
Yeah, if you had only the one, you could learn a little Chinese, and you'd be like, okay, guys, when you do this in Chinese, do that in English. But when everybody's from a different, what was the plan? Was the idea just that they throw all the kids together and you just teach in English, and pretty soon people will figure it out?
Yes, exactly. They just had to come into the fold eventually. Well, some of them really did. I had 2 who could speak English. They were African American students, and they were the only ones that were English speakers. So I kind of relied on them to kind of, continually use the language.
Right.
And so it works out, but I recognized very quickly how difficult it is coming to a land where because many of them were first born here, or some of them were born either in Puerto Rico or in China, and they came here, and now here they're thrown into this class, and have to speak English. So
Wow.
it's difficult. It's very difficult, but children adapt so quickly and learn so quickly.
So did you see that, like, by the end of the school year, were most of the kids at least more proficient? How proficient were they? By the time they left next year, are they going to easily take English classes, or are they still going to struggle for a while?
It depends upon their own, specific capability. Some of them, went right ahead into, this was a fourth grade class. They went right ahead into fifth. Some of them were going to have to be held back because of their inability to speak the language or to read or write. They had to have some sort of facility. I was given a format as to what was expected of them, so as to how much do they need to know before they can go forward. So that was, it was easy to fill in that format, whether they can go forward or not.
Right.
But, anyway, I did have, actually, when I first arrived in New York and I received a New York licensing to teach, I was a high school teacher for English. And my first class, the first assignment I received was in a school that had all kinds of issues with drugs, and there had been a stabbing before I got there. And I had a class that, nobody was listening to me as I was lecturing on grammar. And then I would have some of the students follow me to the bus stop and yell obscenities at me. Well, after about 1 week, I talked to the principal and I said, I cannot do this. And he said, well, I understand. I was only 21 years old. So I said, I am terrified, and I'm sick every day I come to class. Nobody's listening to me. They don't, they're throwing spitballs at each other. These were like 14 and 15-year-old boys, and I'm 21, so that just didn't fly. Yeah.
No, you didn't have the experience that,
No,
I can't believe, as such a young teacher, they just really threw you in, didn't they? Like, they give you this crazy class, and then they switch you to a class where nobody speaks English. Like, good gracious.
No. Well, I had to relicense myself for elementary school, and then I in the meantime, I did day-to-day substituting, and then finally I said I can handle 10-year-olds. That's not a problem.
I can absolutely see that. Well, we're going to go to a short break. We're going to take about 60 seconds off and stretch our legs while our audience listens to a message from Ancient Faith Radio. But we'll be right back. And keep in mind, you're always welcome to join the conversation at 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346. We'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
The Ancient Faith Prayer Book, edited by Archimandrite Vasilios Papavasiliou, brings together the most ancient and popular prayers of Orthodox Christians with some additions that address issues of contemporary life, all rendered in an elegant contemporary English and presented in a compact 4.5 by 7 format for easy use as a daily companion to your prayer life. The Ancient Faith Prayer Book is available in paperback, ebook, and a deluxe leather edition. Also available in cases of 60. A good prayer book is a treasure. Give one to someone you treasure, and get one for yourself when you visit store.ancientfaith.com.
We're We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
Welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Elisa Bieletich, and we're on Ancient Faith Radio. We are talking tonight with Mickey Radakovich. And so we're talking about how she was a young, lovely 21-year-old who went to New York to be in the big city and to teach. And she was thrown in with some of the most difficult classes ever. What a difficult start. Did you start getting discouraged, or did you just have faith that one of these days it was all going to fall into place?
I had faith that I had to do this. I wasn't about to give up anything, in spite of the difficulties. And there were some, with these 10-year-olds, I had some disciplinary problems too, because they were so frustrated not being able to communicate properly, or some of them had some serious learning issues besides, and in addition to the language facility. So
right.
it was. Yeah, I said, no, I have to stay here. I have to complete this. I can't, I'm not leaving this. So
that's
I
nice.
stayed.
That's lovely.
I enjoyed my challenge. But it's interesting. I went to New York thinking, oh, these young people they can hardly wait for me to come and help them through all, when I went into this junior high with these 15-year-olds. Well, no, I was not equipped for that at that point in time. Not at that point in time.
No, I'm sure. And yeah. Eventually, I mean, you would have sons and also, and I'm sure you would have come to a place where you could have gotten that room into ship shape. But right there off the beginning.
No.
What was it like being in New York? Did you have a roommate? Like, where were you living? And
no.
There you were so young. Did you enjoy the city? What did you think about it?
I loved New York City. I loved all the opera and the plays and New York. I think New York City is like a place that's totally different than any other city anywhere. I just have that feeling about it, and I took advantage of all that it had to offer. I met some interesting people. I did go to church on a regular basis. In fact, that's a church. I don't know if anybody recalls, a few years ago, there was a big fire. This was an old Episcopal church.
Yes.
And
was this called
church?
St. Sava's? Also,
yes,
like all Serbian churches, I guess. But this huge church, yeah.
And it was an Episcopal church, and it was more or less, I think what they paid for it was, I don't have all the details on this, but it was a very minimal amount because the Episcopalians gave it because of our Saint Bishop Nikolai, who was very, very highly respected by the clergy of the Episcopal churches in New York City, from what I understand. And I think he was a major factor in the Serbs being able to obtain this, because it's on the historical registry, I believe.
I think you're right.
That building. It was an incredible building. It's a church. It was a church, an Episcopal church, I believe. And so they had this awful fire, and I don't really know the details of all of that. I don't know if it was from the candle.
I think it was. I think that was the story, was that because it was a beautiful place and it was in the news, and they were saying that somehow, I think it was around Pascha, actually, it was around this time of year. And, we have all the candles, and we always have so many candles. And there were candles snuffed out in a bucket that somehow started a fire very quietly overnight. And it was just sad.
Very sad. And so I think they're still in the process of repairing it. I'm not sure. I don't know the details of that, but I do. That's the church that I went to on a regular basis. Now, I also went to churches. There's a Russian church that I attended, very old, beautiful Russian church, because I lived right in Manhattan. And then there was also a Greek church that I attended. I could walk to these churches. The Serbian church, I had to take the bus, but there was a Greek church and a Russian church that were walking distance from me. So every once in a while, I would attend these churches also. So that
So
was,
when you were growing up, had you only been to Serbian churches, or did you have some experience with the other jurisdictions?
I didn't really have much experience with the other jurisdictions as a young girl. As a child, no. When I got a little older, and in my late teens and early 20s, we were having services with the other jurisdictions during Lent, and that was so much fun. Because you got to attend a Lenten service, like a Sunday evening service.
Sure.
And we did
like
that.
pan-Orthodox vespers and things like that.
Right.
That's so lovely. It's a great tradition. It really is
a good
neat.
tradition.
And it's a neat thing as a young woman, I think, to be able to go to some of the other churches, because you start to see, what's Orthodox and what's Serbian, right? To sort of sort through it and see which parts are universal to all of us. And it's lovely. Okay, so there you were single. Did you meet your husband in New York, or did you eventually go back home?
No.
What ended up happening?
I returned back home. I started graduate school, and
what were you studying? What did you want to do?
I was going to stay in my English arena, and I thought I would get a master's degree and then go back and try to teach again. And well, I was hoping to go back to New York at some point in time, and maybe I'd be more ready to deal with these teenagers. I'll be older. I'll be, equipped to handle them.
Right. I'll be 26. I'll handle it great.
Yeah, at least, hey, 26 is better than 21. That's for sure.
It's true.
And well, that's where I met Ron. And
was he in school as well?
No, actually, he was in. At that time, he was in, I think, Spokane, Washington. No, yes. And then he got transferred to New Orleans, Louisiana. He was working already with Kaiser.
How did you meet him?
Well, we met at one of my good friends from Milwaukee, my Serbian friends, married a cousin of his. And so we stood up, we were groom and bridesmaid.
Oh, you were the kumovi for the wedding.
No, he was the, not the groom, but he was the groomsman. He was the groomsman, and I was the bridesmaid.
Okay. Oh, my goodness. That's kind of a cute way to meet, actually. That's adorable.
Yes, it is a nice way to meet. So
did you guys date long distance that whole time?
Yes, we did. And he was living at the time in New Orleans. And so I think about maybe we corresponded and we saw each other a few times in less than a year. And then we got married in Milwaukee and went down to New Orleans where we lived for the next few years.
So were you even though you hadn't seen him a lot, you were confident enough to marry him, huh? Did you know right away that this is the one and I'm not worried about being able to spend time in person? What did you think?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I believe it because he's a great guy. He's clearly the kind of person that you want to snap up immediately.
Oh.
So what did Ron do? What was he doing in New Orleans?
He worked for Kaiser Aluminum in labor management, and he worked for the representing the company Kaiser Aluminum in labor contracts. He negotiated labor contracts.
Okay. Oh, it's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good work. So were you teaching then in New Orleans?
I taught in New Orleans, and there I had a normal class of high schoolers, and it was really, really fun. Now, in New Orleans, we attended a Greek church. I don't recall that we even did it very often because we were there for a year. Mm-hmm. And then Ron got transferred to Spokane, Washington, and there because Ron had been in Spokane previous to being transferred to New Orleans, and then he got transferred back again to Spokane. He was a part of the Greek community in Spokane. They have a very quite a large community in Spokane, Washington, and they have a church, and he was active in that church. So we became active in that church together while we were there for a year.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well,
and
that's
that was
neat.
fun. That was fun. I enjoyed that very much. We had a lot of other jurisdictional people. They weren't just all Greeks. We had, Russians and Serbs. So it was fun. It was fun.
Oh, that's lovely.
Very nice.
So along the way, you had some sons, right? Tell me the story about, did you plan on having kids? Were you surprised? Did you try forever and finally have babies? How did it work out?
No, the two babies came quite quickly, Steve and Mike. And, we wanted children. We didn't have any thought in mind about when or anything like that. When we will have them, we will have them. We were just feeling blessed. That was about it. So
that is a good way to live. That is rare.
Yeah.
That is a good way to live.
I'm not, there were no plans made one way or another. So, and I taught also in Spokane, and then we got transferred to Ravenswood, West Virginia, which is in Appalachia. And that was very interesting. Yeah, that was very interesting living. We did not have any church, anything nearby. So we were there about 2 years, and then went back to New Orleans, and from New Orleans here to the Bay Area.
Wow. Well, so you grew up so much in the big Serbian community, but you really did explore outside for quite a while, where like in Appalachia, you didn't really have a Serbian community at all. You were just...
No, not where we were. We didn't have a church community at all. It was very difficult. But what supplied us with our continuance in the church was we always went back for all holidays back to Milwaukee. And even when the kids were born, we would go back every summer for at least, I would stay with them at least a month or two because my parents were still there. So,
that's good. That's a good way to keep connected. That works out, especially when the kids are young and you can do that.
Yes.
That's wonderful. So how old were your boys when you went off to California?
They were 4 and 5.
Oh, okay. So they probably don't remember really much about living anywhere else. They just pretty much grew up in California. Yes,
correct. Yeah. And they do know Milwaukee because we spent a lot of time there, and they have cousins, and we still maintain contact with my brother and his children. So that was good.
Yeah. Now, when you got, well, I'm curious, when you went to California, did you move into the area where you are now, and was there a church there yet?
Yes, we moved into this area, and we went to church. Well, at that time there was the split in the church, and
that's right,
in the Serbian church.
Yes, yes.
So,
and just for our audience, there was a time when there were kind of two strains of Serbian Orthodox in America. There was a big fight and everybody split apart, but it's been maybe 25 years that everybody's back together.
Yeah,
but, okay.
That's right. So we found the church community here, and we were going to church. At that time, the church was in Castro Valley. That was before we purchased the property here in Moraga and built that. We didn't build that. That church was there. That was a Protestant church, and it was converted into an Orthodox church. Yeah. But
it looks fantastic. You've added a cupola there, right? So now it feels like it must have always been Orthodox, because who else would put that cupola?
Right. Yeah, it was wonderful idea, and the priest suggested that, and everybody said good idea, and we love it. Yeah, it's very Orthodox now, very Orthodox. So we're very happy.
So were you and Ron part of the group then that was going ahead and looking for land and buying something up in Moraga and working it all out?
Yeah. Yes, we were part of that.
Was that just a painful experience, or was it wonderful?
No, I want to look back on it as a wonderful experience because it turned out so well.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, let's stay on the positive side. And
absolutely,
I just thank God that we have a church that we can go to and we have a lovely hall that we can, have our gatherings and people can stay after church. Well, of course, now during COVID, we haven't been able to do a lot of that, but hopefully, God willing, we will return to that again and have those times of coffee hour. And we actually would have lunch after church. It was wonderful. Just absolutely marvelous. So
it's a wonderful parish, and that is a beautiful hall. It's really, really very beautiful. And actually, my wedding was there. But,
yes, it was. It was.
I have all kinds of wonderful photographs from there. In fact, it's a beautiful place.
I'm sure you do. Yeah.
But so when you got, so that you sort of built it, it strikes me as really important. As you said, you're grateful to have a wonderful parish and a good place to be. But one thing, when I meet people who don't have a wonderful parish and a great place to go, I always think, you have to go build it. Like sometimes you're the generation that is called to make it happen. And that was you guys. You really made that parish happen. And so thank God, because it was a blessing, certainly to my family and to so many other people. It's just absolutely wonderful. Now, over the years, Ron has been very involved in the church parish council and stuff. Have you also?
Well, you mean the parish? No, only to work for whatever comes up, whether it's a food festival or that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm always there. So
you're not running for offices and stuff because you're busy doing some other things, right? Like what other sorts of? I know that you worked with the Patriarch Athenagoras Institute, and I don't know what that is. I know so many people involved with it. What exactly is that?
Okay, it's called the Patriarch Athenagoras Orthodox Institute, and what it is a theological program or a theological school, which is part of the GTU, which is the Graduate Theological Union, located on the campus of University of California in Berkeley. So the PAOI is part of that program. Now, the GTU has 9 independent seminaries and 8 programs or schools, and the PAOI is one of those schools within the GTU. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so for a while, Metropolitan Nikitas was there, but he left. Yeah. What was he like? Did you enjoy him?
Oh my goodness, I adored him. He was an incredible leader in our faith. We are blessed with a person of that ability and love of the church and leadership ability. Just incredible. He's incredible. He's now in England, and I believe he has the whole territories of Scotland, Ireland, England. He is
I think you're right. Yeah.
head bishop
he's
there.
neat. He's a neat person. He really is.
Oh, wonderful. So I was part of the women's board for about, 12 or 15 years. And our whole idea was to support the institute and mainly the library, to keep that library stocked, because they have an unbelievable library of Orthodox theological books of all sorts. It's really incredible. They also have a very large collection of icons, very special icons. And so in addition to training people for master's degrees in Orthodox theology.
Oh.
And
well, that's lovely to have a repository like that in the United States. That's a valuable thing. Okay. So you guys were working for that as well.
Oh, I worked on many fundraising committees of all sorts while I was a member of the women's board. And also I worked at the library. I helped the librarian categorize books and place them in, on the shelves and so forth. I loved it. I love books. I love reading. So this was really right in my style.
Absolutely. That's a good fit.
Yeah. And we did a lot of good things for Orthodoxy in our fundraising efforts to promote the PAOI within the GTU. Yeah. So that was very interesting work. Yeah.
That's neat. Absolutely. And so I know one of your sons is involved now with the IOCC. Is that right?
I believe he's not on the board right now. You can be on the board for X number of years, I believe. I think.
Ah,
But
okay. So he did his stint, and now he's all
yeah, he
finished.
did it. Right. He was.
Excellent. Well, it's funny.
Shall we say timed out? Timed out.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because I saw his name on some official IOCC document, and I was laughing because I think of your sons as being like 19 permanently, and so I was, because that's how old they were at my wedding, right? So that's how old they are forever. And, they're so cute. They're wonderful guys, though. So, do you have grandchildren? How has all of that turned out for you?
Oh, that turned out wonderfully. I have 4 grandchildren, two daughters, granddaughters, Kata and Lika, who are 4.5 and 4, and Nicola and Maxime. Nicola is 3 and Maxime is 1.5. So Ron and I are dealing with these very young grandchildren, and maybe that's our blessing to keep us going. I don't know. I hope so, because they are fun.
They'll keep you young at heart for sure. Are they all local to you now? Or do you see the grandkids a lot?
Yes, we do.
That's lovely.
We see them as often as we can. I've had the oldest granddaughter for an overnight, and that was quite an experience. I mean, I'm 82, my husband's 85, and we have this 4-year-old.
Oh, man.
I mean, it's very interesting. Now you realize, oh my goodness, now you know why you are meant to have your children when you are young.
Yeah,
and grandchildren
absolutely.
when you are young. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because you probably didn't think of it as any big thing when you were younger and you had the kids, when you had your boys, and then now, of course, it's just completely overwhelming and exhausting.
That's right.
Oh.
But anyway, also I want to say about IOCC, because Ron and I joined the organization upon its inception. I think 92 was the year. And we have been involved in it ever since. Whatever's required to do fundraising, we work with Angie and Steve Creta here in the Bay Area, who have been unbelievable leaders for our Bay Area IOCC. And if anybody is looking for a good way to help Orthodoxy, that would be the thing to get involved in, because it's international in scope. Their main goal is to help the needy. It's humanitarian, and their administrative costs are only I believe 7%. All the rest goes to aid, humanitarian aid. So that's an incredible stat.
It really is. And it's a lovely thing to know that we have an Orthodox group going out into the world. And they're not just helping Orthodox Christians, it's anyone, right? So like
anyone, yes.
Absolutely. So if there's a natural disaster in a Muslim country, IOCC is there, and they're helping, and they're passing out toothbrushes and patching up injuries and whatever is needed. And it is a beautiful thing. And I love that you and Ron have spent so much time just really dedicating yourself to these beautiful causes and to being so active still in the church community. I think it's just absolutely wonderful. And it's so good to have you on the show, Mickey. It's good just to get a chance to talk to you, frankly, because I hardly ever get a chance to talk to you anymore. But
well, you have to come to the Bay Area and visit us. We have a room for you, believe me.
Excellent.
Come and stay with us.
Careful, I'm going to be right on your doorstep, and you're going to remember how exhausting I am. But at any rate,
thank you, Lisa, so much. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mickey. I so appreciate it. And we appreciate our audience, too. Thank you for joining us again. We'll be back every Sunday night meeting more Orthodox Christians, although actually next Sunday is Palm Sunday. And then after that, we'll have Pascha. So there will be a couple of weeks where we're going to be running some much anticipated encore episodes. And then we'll be back with all sorts of new everyday Orthodox Christians to introduce to you. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Good night. And I think we're waiting for Father Evan Armatas. He's going to be up next with Orthodoxy Live.
Hi,
Oh,
Alyssa.
he's here. Father Evan, how are you? I haven't talked to you in the longest time.
Well, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Thank God. Thank God
Yeah?
I'm doing well. Are you energized and ready for Holy Week? You have one more week of Lent, and then it's like the marathon for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes when people say, gosh, it's so crazy, I'm like, well, the parish I'm in, it's like, this is the pace it feels like you're around. So there you go.
Well,
How about you?
It's good. I guess you're in good shape, right? It's like you've got a marathon, but you're a runner who's running every day, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Thank God, I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. So I'm excited though for your show tonight. I'm sure it's going to be a great one, and I'll be listening.
Tell your family hi.
You bet I will. Thanks, Father.
Earth, peace, goodwill toward men. This is Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox internet connection.
Glory to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armatas, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Good evening, and welcome to this edition of Orthodoxy Live, your live call-in show about the Orthodox faith, her teachings, and her traditions. I'm your host, Father Evan, and we're streaming to you live here on Ancient Faith. I'm glad you're with us. It's April 18th, 2021. Happy birthday, Mom. My mother has her birthday today, and wish her a very happy birthday and many more. Look forward to taking your calls tonight, and you can reach us by dialing in, as our announcer said, at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. You can also get to us if you're listening to this as a podcast, or even if you're listening to us live, but you want to send in a question and don't want to dial in, no problem. You can just go to ancientfaith.com, and there you'll find live radio. Click on that, scroll down to Orthodoxy Live. You'll find a blue microphone button, and click on there, and you can record your question for us. Just a note to our producer tonight, Matushka. I think my VX producer is frozen again, so as we go through the evening, as we get calls, please just text me and let me know that we've got callers on the line. But as we open up, I think there are some open lines, and so if you'd like to get in, now's the time to do it at 1-855-237-2346. You may notice my voice is a little bit hoarse. Alyssa asked if I was ready to go for this last sprint through Great Lent and into Holy Week, and yeah, that's true. But one of the things that always I struggle with is my voice. From the time I was a kid, I've always had nodes on my vocal cords, and I've always struggled with using my voice properly. So by the end of Lent, I've usually worked it over pretty good. But nonetheless, I think I'll make it. I'm pretty sure I will, and God will grant the strength to do that. For those of us who have made this journey before, we're familiar with the fact that the fifth Sunday of Great Lent ends with the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, and a story related to perhaps our own misguided notion of what it means to serve and be with Christ. And we're reminded that the purpose of our spiritual journey is to place others first, to place God and therefore our sisters and brothers first. And today in church, I reminded our community of the important reality of looking at our lives and all of our spiritual journey and growth as ending in our love of God and love of neighbor. And we can get really misguided in this And that's why St. John writes in his incredible epistle, he who says he loves God, but not his neighbor is a liar, because how can you say you love God whom you don't see and not love your neighbor whom you do see? And, James and John on the way to Jerusalem want Jesus to put them in positions of power. They want to be placed first on the right and the left. And Jesus reminds them, and really all of us, that this is not the way of Jesus. This isn't the way of the Christ. The way of Christ is not to see yourself first, but rather to see yourself as, even as he puts it, a slave to all. And to give one's life as a ransom for many, just as the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, did. Anyway, this last lesson comes to us, and we also recall one of the great stories of Christian conversion in the Christian world, a woman named Mary of Egypt, known to us as Saint Mary of Egypt, who turned from a life of sin and towards a life of virtue and spent the balance of the end of her life really pursuing God and sanctity. And what a great example that is, despite her many sins. And we all need to hear that, despite where we've been, wherever we are in our journey in life, there's still time to repent and change the course and direction of our life towards something beautiful and godly. We're going to go out to our first caller, and our producers told me this caller would like to remain anonymous, so I'll just say welcome, caller. It's nice to have you on air.
Hi, Father. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Yeah, you're most welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on, and I'd love to hear your question.
Well, it actually has to do with what you were just talking about. I'm a catechumen, and sometimes when I have two parts to the question. The first part is that sometimes when I hear the stories of the saints, like especially this past week of St. Mary of Egypt, sometimes I really struggle with believing the story.
Sure, of course.
And then the other part is that a lot of the stories that I read or see about the saints have to do with instances of, besides martyrdom, which I totally understand, instances of just really extreme asceticism,
right,
and celibacy, and it just kind of seems like that's the way to be holy. And you don't hear a lot of stories about saints that are married and they raised a great family, and they
lived a godly life
well, and they served the church, and that kind of thing. And it just kind of, I don't know, sometimes I feel I get the impression that even though we say these things are not bad, that God made them, that they're good, and all of that kind of stuff, the examples sometimes that we get over and over are these examples of that kind of make me feel like it's the other way,
Yeah, I love the question. I love the opportunity to talk about it with you. To a degree, I'd say I agree with you. I find so often the lives of the saints are lives that I don't easily or readily identify with, and they're biographies that seem inaccessible to me. Sometimes inaccessible because they highlight an extreme level of asceticism that I can't even begin to fathom. Living in a cave with 1 jug of water and 10 grams of crusty bread a day, right? That kind of thing. Vigils on rocks in the wilderness and things like that. And I can't see myself participating. I'm married, I have 4 kids, and my kids, their lives are busy, and my one daughter is in college, and the other 3, they're normal kids, and it's expensive to raise them, and I can't flee the world and flee the normal needs of life. I've got to provide for them, and so it does. It just seems completely inaccessible to me, and often I can't identify with these stories. And I just say this to, put you at ease and say, I don't think the sentiments that you're feeling are unusual or uncharitable or wrong. I think they're quite normal. the way you're approaching these stories. And so let me tell you, I guess, some of the ways that I deal with that. And I've got more to say about this, so I just want to start here by saying, look, I think those stories for me are stories that I'm familiar with, and I am a type of a gleaner when it comes to them. You know what gleaning is?
Yes. You take what's good out of something, I guess. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I kind of mean like just in that traditional sense of, when harvest time came, afterwards there was that charitable act of allowing the poor into your fields to glean and to take what couldn't be picked up by the harvesters, and to use that as sustenance. That modern, in the modern world, we don't see a lot of gleaning still. But I think conceptually we can understand the idea of going over a well-harvested field and in our impoverished state, finding what is left for us that is still life-giving. So like the story of St. Mary, I often approach it just from a very simple perspective and look at some of the aspects of her life and say, what little bit can I take? Because I can't reap this full harvest. It's not for me. And that's how I take a lot of those stories. That's just me personally, okay? The second thing is to say, practically speaking, the lives of the saints are typically written within the monastic communities, and that's the people they know.
Okay.
And so, when they're writing these biographies in history, and even to the modern day, those are the people they've associated with, and those are the people that they've written about. And it would make sense that they really are highlighting the elements of that part of the church and that part of the community of the church. Okay? Now, you ask that question, and let's say, is there a counterweight? Is there a counterbalance? And perhaps because you're newer to the church, you haven't yet fully come to appreciate that counterbalance and where it's found.
Right.
So let me pause for a second and see if you have any suspicion of where you might find it.
I mean, the only thing that came to mind would be biblical saints that would have been married, and like Priscilla and Aquila and people like that. That's the only thing that pops to mind.
Good.
So to speak.
Yeah. I think that's one element. But to be honest, I need something more modern and relevant often to keep me going. And fortunately, having grown up in the church, I have dozens of them. So, whether it was my grandmother, my great-grandmother, some of the pious women that I grew up with in the church, many, many priests, married priests specifically, Father Dean, Father Lou, Father Tom, Father Chris, Father Christopher, Father George. I mean, I can go on and on. Priests I've known, some of them have passed, Father Peter, another Father George, some of them have passed, some of them are still living, whose lives are exemplary, and the faithful talk about them. I'll give you an example. You may have heard of Father Thomas Hopko.
Yes, I love his stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Father Alexander Schmemann.
Okay.
Father Peter Gilquist. These are married clergy who've lived in the church, lived exemplary lives, well known to the church, and people talk about them all the time,
Right.
And lift up their examples of the things they've taught and done, their priestly ministry. And then, like I said, people in the church. Now, in my community, St. Spiridon's, you hear people talk about contemporary people in the church who have lived saintly lives, and they speak of them in this type of hagiography that you often hear used in, let's say, the monastic circles around some of these saints.
Okay.
And that's an important counterbalance. It's part of our vocabulary. And, my parents, who are in their, my dad's in his 80s, my mom's getting close, they speak of people from their youth, certain members of their community, certain priests they knew, that all of them married, children, owned, let's say, a tavern, or owned a hotel or a convenience store, or worked in a factory. And they speak about their faith in ways that are really helpful. That's important.
Okay.
That's really important. I don't know if that's helpful for you.
I think it is, yeah, because I feel like sometimes, like, what I'm experiencing with the people that I know is exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't always hear the hymns or the things like that talk about those everyday people that are just being faithful, Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an incredibly important, and perhaps the narratives need to be elevated more in the popular conscience of people, that, again, for those of us who grew up with, families that came from areas that were Orthodox, this was common to them to speak about a certain godly person in their village or in their parish. And, I see it we had a woman pass last March. She was the first death from COVID in northern Colorado. And she was such a godly woman, and she had been born in Greece and raised there and came to the States. And so many in my community are new to the faith, and they got to know this woman, and they talk about her still, the way she would bake her offering bread for liturgy, or on the Saturday of Lazarus, she would have gifts for all the children. I think she called them lazarakia, little Lazarus breads. The way that she would notice children on their named day, their feast day, and just the way that she would be in church and praying and faithful. So, an element of that has begun in the community, and hopefully will continue. So that's something. Your first question, though, when you talked about the fantastical, almost the sort of inbreaking of events that are beyond our comprehension miraculously, right? Miracles upon miracles. I think, again, I'm look, if this is a confession, I would say I tend to not be on the charismatic scale. That's just not where I am as a Christian. And that's okay. I tend to be more of a pragmatist when it comes to the Gospels. It doesn't mean I can't appreciate the charismatic, but I don't experience it very often. It's not where my world is. But I've found that the precepts of Christ and his teachings are transformative for me when followed. My life is completely different because of them. For me, that's enough.
Okay.
I don't need the other stuff. I have experienced it not personally per se, I mean, somewhat a little bit, but, I've been places or seen things that I was like, wow, that is really beyond anything I would have expected in the physical world. And, but I don't sort of store it away like a squirrel for the winter and feed on it. It's just not where I go. And I think here's just a personal thing. You may notice for yourself that that's just not edifying, and that's fine. It doesn't need to be for you. You can find your food elsewhere. And you can leave that to what it is and just move on. And you don't even need to judge yourself for going, I don't know. That's just not for me. That's fine. Why is that? I think, one of the challenges, I think, in modern Orthodoxy is a tendency to try and get everything to be so same, so monolithic, and have an expectation that being Orthodox looks one way. And, I don't, that's not what I grew up with. And it's certainly something I would like to sort of correct in the church, and say, look, people through 2,000 years from all walks of life, levels of education, levels of piety were in the church, and the church accepted everyone, and didn't sort of put a stamp on one type. And it's really dangerous in today's, sometimes I'll go to a parish and everybody's got a headscarf, everybody's doing prostrations, everybody, and you're kind of like, are we nameless and faceless? Like, I grew up in a parish where, there was people that were all over the place, doing all sorts of things. And that's a little bit more like the dragnet that the gospel talks about. And it's also like the level of diversity we find in Scripture,
Yeah, I've heard of and I don't know anything about it, but I've heard that in some European countries where you go to a church and that's what you experience, that people might be doing all kinds of different things.
Yep.
While the service is going on, or whereas I feel like maybe we're a little bit more lockstep kind of with what we're doing, which isn't part of our. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just Well,
I'll give you an example. I mentioned it in my book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. We kind of have one version of marriage in America. And that's it. And, in the old country, if someone was antisocial and sometimes even difficult to get along with, they might have been a shepherd. And they had a good marriage and raised good kids, but they weren't around a lot because they couldn't be, We just don't have any paradigm for this anymore. And we flattened everything, right? And, I just think it's better that we say, look, I can appreciate for you the lives of the saints and the stories you read are edifying and they lead you closer to Jesus. Great. And you must appreciate for me that they don't. And, I really just want to stay immersed in Scripture, or, I just want to really work at a soup kitchen, or, you know what I'm saying? It's like, no problem. Yeah. No problem. It should, what? You broke up a little bit. Sorry. Were you saying something? Oh, I don't know if I lost you. You there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My phone keeps switching to Bluetooth by accident.
No problem. Well, I hope I've helped.
You have. That is very, very helpful. I really appreciate it. It's been bothering me for a while, so it's good to to talk to somebody about it. So it's good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for calling. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your journey.
Okay. Thank you so much, Father.
Good night. Well, again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith. The number to call if you'd like to get in tonight is 1-855-237-2346. We had a caller call in and record a question on prayers for people. His name was David. Let's take a listen to that question.
Hello, Father Evan. It's David calling from Calgary, Alberta. I'm calling because I have some people that are very near and dear to me, whom I love very much, who really don't want to have anything to do with God and don't want God's forgiveness and wouldn't even admit that there is a God. And I understand that praying for someone is an act of love, as you mentioned a couple of weeks back, which I found was a very encouraging comment, because I was thinking at times that my prayers were futile. But what I'm really wondering now, Father, is how do I go about praying for these people who are actively rejecting God in their lives? And mostly, it's like, what words do I use? I just don't know how to go about actually praying for those who don't want my prayers, Thank you, Father. God bless, and have a great and productive and fruitful Lent.
David, it was nice to hear your Canadian about in your question. Thanks for calling. I think you're asking a question a lot of people think about. I don't think many of us have walked through this life without encountering a rejection over things that we hold dear. In this case, something as dear and essential to your life as your faith in God and your life in Christ. I often think about this in the context that I live in. I have a large family, an extended family, lots of siblings and nephews and nieces and cousins and aunts and uncles, and beyond that, sort of family friends. And no one's immune to the world and to its march. And, I said to my wife even yesterday, increasingly feel different or isolated as a Christian. And not just with, people I don't know, or don't share a common life with, like perhaps acquaintances or neighbors or parents of children that my kids are friends with or play sports with, but even within those closer to me, family friends and cousins and aunts and uncles. And, I'm an odd duck because I'm a priest. And I work in this world where my pursuit is the establishment of the kingdom of God in the lives of my parishioners and, hopefully, in my own life. And so your question, it's personal. You're not just asking a question that I think is rambling around in your own head, but I think it's in the hearts and minds of a lot of us, and in me personally. I think, one very simple and easy response to that is to make your life a prayer. What I mean by that is, prayer being a dialogue with God and an opportunity to get in the vicinity of God. And, our prayer, when you say you don't know how to pray, that prayer for those who are estranged or anti or opposed to a life of faith, your life has to become the prayer. You have to exemplify something. I'm reminded of a dear friend of mine years ago. We're not close anymore, not for any reason other than time and distance, but it was someone I went to high school with. And when I stepped out and stepped forward in a life of faith by attending seminary and getting ordained, we ran into each other. And she approached me and told me of her own journey to faith because she saw from a distance my journey and how that really inspired her to consider a way of life that she was not willing to consider prior. That really took me aback at the time, but it's why I'm saying this first part. I think David, just attempt to live a godly life as best you can and allow that life to be visible to your loved ones and friends, and leave God's part to God. Then when it comes to what to pray, there are many services or prayer services available in the church that we can pray, both within our typical prayer books with our evening or morning prayers that have opportunities for our own devotion, or even in the litanies of prayers to pray for others. And we can just simply lift up those type of arrow prayers, short prayers for one another. We can also give, if you will, ourselves over to a type of holy obligation to stand in vigil or silence or in prostration, physical stuff, for others. Not much different than what we would consider when we're at a hospital and someone's sick. And we go and we don't have anything to say, and there's nothing, quote unquote, we can do. Like we can't administer any of the medicine, we don't know what to give, and they perhaps are so ill that they can't even converse with us. And what do? We just sit in the room and hold vigil. We spend some sleepless nights with them. And the medical world knows how powerful and important this is. And what a terrible thing right now with the pandemic that those types of vigils aren't able to occur often. But that is a holy thing. So we know it from the secular world. So you can transfer it. It comes from the spiritual world of just hold vigil. Just stand even silently and connect yourself, through your heart and your maybe thoughts towards, with, and connected to that other person. And as I said, you may do prostrations, you may just simply sit there, whatever that might be. The third thing is, things like a supplication service, known in Greek as the paraklesis to the Theotokos, or the supplication service to the bearer of God, or agathos services. There's one to Christ the Almighty Savior. And then if there's specific needs someone might be struggling with, there are various agathos. You can Google these services, and you can purchase them as well. If you'd like to get a little service book, one of the great resources is the bookstore at St. Paisios Monastery in Safford, Arizona. They've published a lot of these agathos, and you can browse their bookstore on their website or call the monastery and ask. But those services, right? And even you using the Jesus prayer. So we may take the Jesus prayer and add it to our prayer time in a very personal way by saying, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon, and then we use the name, David. I don't think it would make sense to maybe say a sinner in that condition, perchance, just out of humility. I'm not going to classify. I know all have sinned and fall short, but, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon thy servant David. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon thy servant Connie. And you can just do that as well. These are some ways, and appreciate, David, the question. And the intent of your heart. So, again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith. Believe it or not, first time in many, many weeks, we've got wide open lines. So if you've been wanting to call in with a question, tonight's your night to do it at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-radio. I'm going to get a drink of water, and we're going to take a short break and rest my voice for just 30 seconds, and we'll be right back.
Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan will be back in a moment. In the meantime, lines are open at 1-855-AF-radio. That's 1-855-237-2346.
Hi, this is Father Evan Armatas, priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado, and the host of the Ancient Faith Radio Sunday night call-in show Orthodoxy Live. I am pleased to announce today the release of my first book for Ancient Faith Publishing, titled Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. It seeks to provide a guide to the three basic and primary disciplines of Orthodox spirituality. Through these disciplines, Christ opened for us a path that frees us from the disordered way of life that has become normal for many, even though their hearts and minds tell them otherwise. Please join me in exploring the three-legged stool of Orthodox spiritual practice, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Books now available at store.ancientfaith.com. And the title, once again, is Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. I look forward to sharing it with you. God bless.
Father Evan is ready for your call, and our lines are open at 1-855-AF-radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Evan.
Well, welcome back to the second half of this show. And as I said, as we opened up, it's our last Sunday of Great Lent, and next Sunday, Palm Sunday. The following one is our celebration of Pascha. And you can probably guess by now, but next week and the week after we won't be on air. We'll be busy, myself being one of the we, we'll be busy with church services to celebrate our Lord's triumphant entry, and then the bridegroom services, which begin that evening and the following Sunday. Although we don't have services in the evening of Pascha, well, I'm pretty sure we'll all be celebrating, and I'll be fairly wiped out after a very long week of services. And in my parish, gosh, I'm wondering if I'm going to get it all the way through my list of confessions, but it's been a few hundred already, and every day another dozen or so. So you can all pray for me. I've got a question from, I mentioned confessions, from an anonymous caller or listener who writes in. Father bless. A very long time question that has been in my heart and mind is about how does someone do an anonymous online only confession, especially when I am a current online only parishioner. I happen to be in a situation as a parishioner that I can't give out personal information. How can a relationship be developed? Thank you for all the resources you provide. And your prayers, please, anonymous. So, anonymous caller, you're basically asking, what do I do when I attend church online, and I am an anonymous attender because of safety reasons or other reasons, and how do I participate in the sacrament of confession? I think what I would do if I were in your shoes is I would write to a priest, and I say write, not email, not phone call, because this ancient custom is found within the tradition of the church of providing a confession by letter. And you can still remain anonymous. You don't have to put a return address unless you can feel confident with the priest, or perhaps you could ask them to respond. So, write a letter to a priest and give your confession, and allow that priest to read it and to pray for you and write back. Yes, obviously, placing the stole on your head and hand and reading that prayer before the icons may not occur. But I don't think God would play a game with you about this, and he would certainly understand the reasons for doing what you need to do. So that's what I would do. If that's not available to you, then perhaps a phone call. Find a priest that would be willing to hear your confession by phone and call them. And I guess last resort is even email. In the end of the day, what's important is the process of seeking God's mercy and forgiveness by a careful reflection, by finding a way forward through that reflection and our contrition to a new way of living, and to add in the pastoral counsel of someone else, in humility to submit ourselves to God's wisdom through another person. Of course, the grace that comes through confession, that's available only in confession, is something we should seek and desire for our own soul's well-being. And it sounds like you've got to find a different way, and that's okay. So thanks, dear anonymous listener, for asking that question. We're going to go back out to the phones, and I think we have, is it Winter? Winter, are you there?
I am here. Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure. Where are you calling from, Winter?
From Oregon.
Oh. What part?
Actually, I am in the Willamette Valley, south of Portland.
How pretty.
Yes, it is gorgeous, and the weather has been beautiful.
Has it?
Right?
Yeah. Are you from there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. So I've had so many beautiful memories established in Oregon, some trips that I've taken in years past. It's been a long time since I've been there, but what a beautiful state. And
It is.
yeah, I know. Do you have a home parish there?
I don't. I'm actually still just an inquirer.
Oh, gotcha. No, that's wonderful that you're checking things out. May God bless your journey. Yeah. Well, Winter, welcome to the program, and I'd love to hear your question.
So I was just wondering, I have been watching your parish on YouTube and following your edition of
Father Gabriel?
another priest.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And how that's allowed you to have two different services because you've added him. My question is, how is that going to affect your Pascha Vigil?
It's so interesting because it's a good problem to have when your parish is large enough that you can't really fit all in one spot. And you certainly couldn't fit all in one spot if we're following the health protocols that we've received from the county. And so, one of the things that we attempt to do in our liturgical life within the church is to provide guidance through our local hierarch for how we conduct our services. So what I did, Winter, it's pretty practical and simple. In looking at the liturgical life of my parish, and it's fairly active and robust, I knew going into Holy Week that there was no way we're going to be able to accommodate the entire community if we didn't make some necessary adjustments. So I thought through what perhaps we could do, and I placed those suggestions in front of my bishop and asked him, this was a few weeks ago, to provide his blessing and guidance. And so basically what we did is, because we have a second priest now, and I also have 2 deacons, so that's helpful too, to know that there's not just another priest, but I've got 2 deacons that faithfully serve. So there's 4 clergymen in my parish. Is we doubled up a lot of the services. So for example, during Holy Week, starting on Wednesday, there's a service of Holy Unction and anointing, healing for the sick, and prayers for those who are sick, spiritually or physically. And that's a service that most of the community wants to attend. And I knew that we wouldn't be able to get everybody into one service. So we're going to do that service twice on Holy Wednesday, on Wednesday, right? Then when it got to Good Friday, especially the evening service, the Lamentation, that's again another service that most of the faithful want to participate in. So once again, we're going to hold that service twice at different times so that we can utilize the facility twice and get everybody in. And then for the vigil, the bishop's direction was that we would hold 2 simultaneous liturgies. We've got a large gymnasium and a sanctuary, so we'll hold one in the sanctuary and one in the gym church, as I like to call it, and we'll do those services at the same time. Father Gabriel will be in one space, I'll be in the other, and that will basically allow us to double the size of who we can serve at one service in order to allow for everyone to participate, So just kind of practical. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that sounds, I didn't even think of simultaneous. But, I'm thinking of, everybody wants to be there from 11:30 to be. No, that makes sense. Good.
Yeah, and I think, when you ask that question, you actually are asking a bigger question, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but you basically are asking, how does the church design the services and balance the design of the services for the people, and not just look at the services as an end in themselves, because we can do the services and not really consider the faithful. And, I actually kind of grew up in a paradigm like that, where the services were done for the service's sake, and very little concern was given to how the faithful would participate or integrate into the life of the church, liturgically speaking. And over time, such a perspective and direction leads to the disconnect of the faithful. And the faithful become no longer engaged, but rather kind of consumers. You know, sort of like they pick and choose times to come, and they sort of become connoisseurs of holy events, you know, not active liturgical beings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
So my view, it's like, boy, the services are for the people. So whatever we can do, whether it's looking carefully at the language we use, looking carefully at the music we sing, looking carefully at the way we address the people when they're there, and accommodate them in ways that we can. Obviously, we're not going to throw out the liturgy or the order of the divine services, but there are things that we can do. There are choices we can make, such as, well, everybody wants to be here, so let's hold two services at the same time so that everybody can be here, right? And no one feels left out. So, yeah, good question.
Yeah. No, great solution.
Can you tell me, do you have a parish that you're checking out right now, or a community that you found?
I have visited St. John's in Beaverton. Is the most recent one that I visited. Yeah.
I know St. John's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Didn't the former priest there has moved back to Colorado?
He has, Father Theodore. We actually are team teaching a course at the seminary right now. And so,
I did see that. Nice.
Yeah, I know Father Theodore well. And I can't recall the exact name of it. Is it Father Michael? Is that the new priest? Very tall man.
It's been a while since I've been there, you know, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sounds correct.
That sounds right. Yeah. Well, if you need a friend out in that area, I know several people in that community, and you can always reach out to me on Orthodoxy Live at ancientfaith.com, and I'm happy to connect you with some wonderful, lovely people in that area. So, thanks for calling, Winter.
Appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Bye bye. Well, as Winter drops off, I got another email here from a listener wanting to know the church's position on original sin. So this particular question comes in from, I want to get this name right, Nathan. The last name, I'm not going to try it. I think I'll get it wrong. But Nathan. And Nathan writes on, "Hi, Father Evan. I'm a former Protestant who's new to Orthodoxy. Can you please explain what the Church teaches on original sin?" Well, that word or term, original sin, is probably a term that most of us are familiar with, but it's not a term, if we're careful, it's not a term that the Orthodox Church traditionally uses. Traditionally, the Orthodox Church uses the term ancestral sin, not original sin. And certainly original sin, the doctrine of it, is something that in the modern world has its own set of understandings. It sort of brings up a whole list of ideas, but probably most prominently is the original sin of Adam and his disobedience to God, and his guilt for it is something that is passed on to his descendants. That's all of us, right? And this basic idea is not an idea that the Church believes. The Church does not believe nor teach, and this is not something new. We've always believed and taught this, that original sin and the guilt of it is not something that you and I inherit. In fact, what we would say is that we have within the human race ancestral sin. In other words, there is sin of our ancestors, beginning with Adam's disobedience to God, and in his willing and free disobedience and non-adherence to God's way of life, he diverted himself, or fell from God's path to perfection, and in a sense separated himself from God, his creator, and the source of life and love. That decision of Adam is not a decision that passes on to us a guilt, but it does leave consequences for the human race. And we all participate in our own way in the fall of Adam. And so this is what the church says. It says, because of the fall, because of our ancestral sin, we are subject to mortality, subject to death. We're no longer going to live forever. And there is a separation of our body from our soul. And, this separation and this numbering of our days in the church is generally understood as a mercy. Because death cuts us off from sin. It ends the cycle of sin. And we don't want this sin in our life or the evil in our life to be eternal. So God takes the consequence, which really could be viewed as a punishment, and says, let me change it into a mercy and end the number of days in which you will be in sin. The second thing is that we say, no, we're not guilty for Adam's sin. We're guilty for our own. But all of us fall from God's grace. And because of Adam's choice, what's introduced into humanity is a propensity or a disposition or an inclination, we could say, towards sin. And just as we would say death enters the world through sin, and now sin enters through fear of death, you and I, through our own sort of inclination towards evil, we participate in all of that. And it doesn't seem that any human being ever has been born except Christ, who introduces, of course, all of these 2 points so far. I'm going to make one more. Are things that Christ reverses. So Christ overcomes the numbering of our days, and we can participate in the resurrection. He ceases our inclination towards sin and gives us a path towards righteousness. The other thing we can say is that the image of God in us, which is indelible, doesn't get obliterated, but it's sort of corrupted. It's disfigured. Our nature, our human nature, in the view of the church, by going through this idea of ancestral sin, says, look, our nature is still good even after the fall, and we're not totally depraved, as Western Christianity, some forms of Western Christianity begin to say, and that we are still capable of doing good things, although our own bondage to death and the influences of the devil obviously can dull our ability and our even understanding of what is good. And as a result, we can often participate in all sorts of evil things. The other things are also, as we know, as God says, when Adam makes a decision to walk away from God, then, in his life, he will sweat and toil and hunger and thirst, and he'll be weary and have pain and sorrow. All of those things will come to pass for humanity, and they do. And, I think those are some of the things that I would bring out. There's some other things we could talk about, but, original sin and the way that it's presented, it's almost not worth repeating what it is, because in the church, we just don't have a view of original sin in that manner. To a degree, we almost don't have a view of sin that's similar. We kind of look at sin through a different lens as well. And, what does it mean to sin? But anyway, another question that came in here is from Ben, and so he writes in and says, "Hi, Father, I have a question that I've been unable to get an answer from using the internet." Well, there's that sort of Google Doc. I don't know if there's Google Priest. Can a married man become a novice monastic in the Orthodox Church? So in the Orthodox Church, the path of monasticism and the idea of becoming a novice, or sometimes you hear oblate, which is something we hear often in, let's say, Western monasticism, is not as known or developed in Orthodoxy. And rather, those who choose a path of monasticism are typically celibate, sometimes widowed, or if they are married, then typically what happens is this is a path chosen later in life, after the years of childbearing, when a husband and a wife would determine that the path for them and their path towards the kingdom will include time as monastics, as celibates. And so a wife may decide of her own free will, this is not something that the husband or even the wife is compelled to do. She may decide, I want to enter a monastery. And not only must she have freedom in that, but she must receive, her husband's blessing. Vice versa. A husband may decide, my life is, my days on this earth are to be finished as a monastic, and he must make that choice of his own free will. And likewise, his wife must give her blessing for him to do so. And so I know of couples who have both joined monastic communities after many years of marriage, and not with any rancor, animosity, totally in freedom and love, and with a clear conscience and decision to live this way in the end of their lives. Now, this is not too dissimilar from what we see even going into marriage, that when one decides to unite themselves to their spouse becomes the vehicle or a vehicle towards salvation. My marriage is for my salvation. And so that's why it's a bit incongruous to say we've got monastics who are married. No, because monasticism is a path to salvation and marriage is a path to salvation, and we make a choice. And later in life, that, as I already mentioned, that choice may be that we're going to live the rest of our lives as monastics, but it's not that we don't get a divorce. Our marriages aren't dissolved, but rather we focus, as St. Paul kind of says, for a time more deeply in prayer. And in this case, it's more like a season. Now, when we talk about the elements of married life and the elements of monastic life and how the two can be in conversation with one another, then the church has much to say about what can be borrowed from each side. It would be incorrect to say that the married people within the church, that they're borrowing only from the monastics, and the monastics don't get anything in return from those that are married. No, there's a dialogue, and elements of monastic life we may incorporate. Always, with a measure of seasoning. It's not advisable for you to set up your home, if you're married, like a monastery. That won't go well, and it's not often beneficial and often damaging. But there are elements of the monastic communities that we can bring in, and that's true the other way. Monastic communities benefit from their association with families and communities. I've seen this in a very natural and organic way with our own parish and our frequent trips to monasteries and certain monasteries specifically, and the relationship that's been formed between our parish and the monasteries that we visit, and the sisters or brothers at those monasteries, and vice versa. The spiritual friendships that have formed, and the cross-fertilization, in a sense, spiritually speaking. So, well, listen, as I close out tonight, I want to wish all of you a beautiful end to your Lenten journey. a joyous celebration to our Lord's resurrection. For those catechumens who've been preparing for baptism, which traditionally occur on the Saturday of Lazarus and on Holy Saturday, we wish every blessing upon you as you enter the church sacramentally. May God's rich and abundant grace and His Holy Spirit be with and fill your hearts with His wisdom and knowledge and grace. We welcome you as sisters and brothers in Christ. For those of you who have begun your journey or will be celebrating for the first time the Paschal Vigil or Holy Week with the Church, I hope it's a blessing to all of you. For Matushka Trudy, who works hard behind the scenes, and all the people at Ancient Faith Radio who make this show possible, we wish you a joyous celebration of our Lord's resurrection. For Orthodoxy Live and Ancient Faith Radio, I'm Father Evan. Good night and God bless.
This is Father Tom Soroka, inviting you to join me every Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central for Ancient Faith Today Live. We'll be discussing issues that you care about from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. That's every Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, here on Ancient Faith Radio.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
So when I was talking to Josh about like our schedule for the week, which like he doesn't think is a conversation we need to have, and I'm like, yes, we do. Like, you like. So I was like, oh, are you going to be, like, is there a night you're not going to be home this week or something? And he was like, yeah, Thursday. And I was like, oh, good, because I'm recording the podcast with Christina then. He was like, do you know what your listenership is? And I was like, no. He's like, what if 0 people listen to it? And I was like, okay, A, thanks. B, I was like, well, I still like talking to Christina for an hour every other week, so I guess I'll keep it up.
Listen, you know what? We have listeners. They're out there. Right? You're listening, aren't you? Yeah. Actually, I know it's true because at the very least we have friends and who tell me things that we should talk about or just tell me that they disagreed with us. I get that fairly often. I listen to your podcast, but I disagree with you. Okay, that's good. Cool. I'll go with that.
Good. Okay, so I can report back and say we do have listeners.
And you can tell them I said rude.
I know. I was like, seriously?
Oh, ridiculous. So yay, we're back from Christmas break. First podcast
happy
back.
New Year. Do you make New Year resolutions or are you not in that business?
So as an Enneagram 1, I feel like I have to be careful with things like that because I tend to live in a land of rules and resolutions just turn in, like, I'm not very good with, like, I have to come up with things that are like habits or progress based. Cause if I like try to give myself something too strict, it just turns into another like insane thing that I torture myself with. So yeah, I don't have any really big ones. I have like annual goals that are like how many books I'm going to read and like stuff I want to do with my family, but not like change who you are. I do that to myself on the hourly. What about you?
As an Enneagram 3, I am already perfect and flawless, so there's no need for me to make any resolutions. But my resolution,
I like actually just choked on this tea.
But my resolution is to read more poetry.
I like that. Where are you going to start?
I don't know. So I really liked when we read the Mary Oliver book. So I might try and pick up some of her other books because that one we read was kind of like a hodgepodge of like everything she's ever written. So maybe I'll look at some of her stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I feel like you're going to get a really like a text after this with some books like you've been sending me.
I would love. Yeah, you probably will. If anyone wants to recommend some poetry, maybe like read some like Rumi, like, going back to the mystics and stuff. So,
yeah. Oh, that's exciting. I set a book like an actual goal for reading because I feel like I read so much last year that I didn't really pay attention to how much I read. So I was like, okay, I want to at least keep track. And I set a goal for like 2 books a month, but I really think I might have actually read more than that this year. So I don't know if I made myself like an easy, like,
right.
But whatever.
Also, hopefully next year we won't spend half the year, or this year, I guess, stuck in our houses. So
doing nothing except for reading and cross stitching and crocheting.
Yes. Yeah, I've been crocheting up a storm.
I've gotten myself into traditional, like Eastern European Greek style cross stitching. I like getting really good at like becoming a grandmother. I'd make a really great yaya at this point.
Yeah, I think that's happened to all of us. One day I realized during the week I had like made bread, crocheted something, and made soup, and I was like, I'm like 86 years old. Like,
and you probably did it all in your house shoes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's good to be in a new year. I do feel like that, and just to have some kind of like real marker of time that you can't like go back on. But I feel like the first week back to work is always a major disaster for me because I took a week off. Well, I took a week off and then my house flooded, which we don't need to go down that road. But I was not in my house for my week off because my house flooded. And then it came back this week and was like, I'm not going to schedule any meetings on Thursdays. And I had like 7 meetings today, I'm pretty sure. Today being a Thursday. So I'm not doing so great with that. I think that should probably be a resolution, like a cap on how many meetings I schedule myself in a day.
Absolutely. Yeah, the transition back to work is always difficult. Even though like you kind of reach the point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to like be back at work and whatever, but you're always like, ugh. My life just becomes me writing 2020 on everything and all the kids being like, it's 2021. I'm like, okay.
Hey, they have like learned something,
There you go.
They're paying attention.
At least they learned that the calendar year changes.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, so we did not have a plan to talk about more Taylor Swift at the beginning of 2021 in our original
did.
schedule. Yeah, but then she, decided, what we should do? We should drop another album before the end of the year. And so I felt like since last time we had such a good time talking about folklore, we should talk about Evermore.
Yeah,
so
this is just slowly becoming like a T Swift fangirl podcast.
I never thought I was a Taylor Swift fangirl, but I definitely am. I've decided.
This album had like way more bops than Folklore. Like Folklore was kind of like in your feels, like cozy up with a cardigan, hence the song Cardigan. And just like think about your life. This one was like, ooh, like a little bit spicy.
I feel you. But it still felt like related. Like it was Taylor Swift. I feel like every album is like a completely different artist, but I did feel like Folklore and Evermore are like sisters or cousins or something. Like they go together for sure. I also thought that the lyrics were even better. I remember we talked about last podcast about some of the lyrics like being really awesome on Folklore, and then some of them being like, I'm sorry, what does that mean? Like, how does that work? And I didn't really have any of those moments listening to Evermore. I was like, oh, I'm into this poetry. I'm into the flow of these songs and the metaphor she's throwing out. So,
yeah, I was a fan. I probably liked it more than Folklore, I would say.
I think so. I think I did too. I also went down a YouTube rabbit hole last week where I found this couple of videos of this rapper who'd never heard Taylor Swift before ever, or faking it. I don't know, whatever. We'll pretend he'd never heard it before. Listening to Taylor Swift for the first time. And I have to say it was amazing. And also because he was a musician, he was like pointing things out to me about her music and the way she does lyrics and the way she uses music that I would never have noticed. Like I would have just been like, this is a cool song that he pointed out that I was like, oh my gosh, she is like kind of a genius. I'm very impressed. Anyway, you can go, it's not hard to find. You can just Google rapper reacts to Taylor Swift if anyone out there wants to go down the same rabbit hole I did.
I went down a YouTube rabbit hole the other day of Downton Abbey characters doing American accents. So, these things happen.
Oh, I'm a fan of that. That sounds up my alley.
Yeah, it was
as well.
really entertaining. We don't have to get into that now, though. Okay, so
let's just talk about the songs we liked and what we got out of it.
Okay, so my favorite song on the album was Long Story Short. What a bop. I was in the shower the other day listening to it, and I was like washing my hair, and I was like, ooh, wrong guy. Okay, so this was my favorite song. But what I liked about it is like it still had the kind of like authentic Taylor Swift, like let me think about my life and my choices, but like not as depressing as some of her other songs where she's like, what have I done? This one's like much more like upbeat and catchy. So what?
I don't know. I was like into it, like you were gonna sing a Taylor Swift song there, and then I realized you were just like intoning your own sentence.
Oh yeah. Okay. So what I kind of got out of this like change in tone, I guess, because some of her more upbeat songs have been like more her being angry, right? Like Bad Blood and like things like that, like.
Right, or even Shake It Off. They're more like the tell the world
and, like,
off
Blank
kind of
Space,
songs.
like yeah. This one was just kind of like, ooh, I've matured. So like the song is kind of about how like we have these mistakes, right? Like she kind of reflects on like the things that she's done. But the moral of the song is that you learn from them and move on. But what I especially liked is how she called the song Long Story Short, because I think that part of the problem or like pitfall we might fall into with our mistakes, especially like talking about like romance mistakes or something, is you just like harp on them and go like on and on and on. And like you love to tell this like saga about how you were wronged or like your heart was broken.
Right.
But here, like she's kind of just like, yeah, it happened, but like you don't need to hear about it. Like what's more important is like where I am now.
Yeah, that's funny. I was just talking to somebody else the other day about that exact issue of like at the end of somebody was, at the end of a breakup and like over processing the whole experience and not being able to just like learn from it and move on. But I think we do this in other things too, right? Like going to confession. I think maybe, I don't know if we've talked about that before, but like going to confession and needing to give like the saga of what led you to the mistake that you made, rather than just being like, I screwed up and I would like to move on and repent and learn from that. Like,
yeah, I think that like diving into the long story part of it also like lends yourself more to putting blame or like making excuses, right? Because you're like, oh, if I explain to you like what they